Marcus Chin had always been good at reading people. 20 years as a wildlife photographer had taught him to observe, to notice the small details others missed. That skill served him well when he walked into the dingy pet shop on the outskirts of Bangkok, following a tip from a local conservation group about illegal animal trafficking. The shop owner, a thin man named Vikram Patel, emerged from the back room wiping his hands on a dirty cloth. His eyes were nervous, darting between Marcus and the front door as if expecting trouble. The legitimate animals in the front of the shop looked healthy enough: colorful birds, small reptiles, fish tanks bubbling quietly. But Marcus knew the real business happened in the back rooms, away from casual customers and prying eyes. "You are the one who called about special animals?" Vikram asked in broken English, his voice barely above a whisper. The accent was thick, but Marcus understood perfectly. He had spent enough time in Southeast Asia to pick up the language patterns of people trying to conduct a legal business with foreign buyers. Marcus nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the anger building in his chest. He had seen too many beautiful creatures suffer at the hands of traffickers like this man. "My client is very particular about rare specimens," he said, playing the role of a wealthy collector's agent. "Price is not an issue, but authenticity is everything." Vikram's eyes lit up with greed, the universal language that transcended all barriers. "Come, come." He motioned toward a narrow doorway hidden behind a curtain of cheap plastic beads. "I have something very special, very rare. Tiger cub, only 3 months old." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Tiger cubs were among the most trafficked animals in the world, torn from their mothers to feed the appetite of people who saw exotic animals as status symbols rather than living beings. Most cubs died within weeks of capture, unable to adapt to captivity or improper care. They walked through a maze of cramped corridors lined with cages. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of animal waste, fear, and death that made Marcus's stomach turn. He had documented wildlife trafficking before, but experiencing it firsthand never got easier. The sounds were worse than the smells. Whimpering, scratching, the occasional cry of an animal in distress. "Here," Vikram said, stopping in front of a small cage barely large enough for a house cat. Inside, curled in a corner on a piece of dirty cloth, was the most beautiful and heartbreaking sight Marcus had ever seen. The tiger cub couldn't have been more than 12 weeks old. Its orange coat was dull from poor nutrition, and its eyes held a mixture of fear and confusion that spoke of trauma no young animal should endure. The cub was thin, too thin, and Marcus could see the outline of its ribs beneath the striped fur. "She is perfect, no?" Vikram said, completely oblivious to the suffering in front of him. "Mother was killed by poachers 2 weeks ago. Very fresh, very healthy. No diseases, no problems. Perfect for private collection." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper now would only result in him being thrown out, and the cub would remain trapped. "How much?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. $50,000, Vikram said without hesitation. "Very good price for such rare animal. In America or Europe, much more expensive. This is special deal for serious buyer." The price was astronomical, but Marcus knew wealthy collectors paid even more for illegal exotic pets. The economics of wildlife trafficking were driven by people with too much money and too little conscience, willing to pay anything for the thrill of owning something forbidden. "I need to see documentation," Marcus said, stalling for time while he figured out his next move. He couldn't simply buy the cub. That would only encourage more trafficking. But he couldn't walk away and leave the animal to suffer either. "No documentation," Vikram said quickly. "This is private sale, you understand. No papers, no questions. Very discreet, very safe. Money today, animal today." Marcus pretended to consider the offer while studying the layout of the room. There were 3 other cages visible, containing what looked like pangolin scales, ivory pieces, and several exotic birds. This wasn't just a pet shop. It was a distribution center for some of the world's most endangered species. My client will want to inspect the animal personally, Marcus said finally. Can you bring the cub to a neutral location tomorrow? Somewhere more private? Vikram's face showed suspicion for the first time. Why not here? This is a safe place, good for business. Your client can come here, see everything we have. My client values discretion above all else, Marcus replied smoothly. He prefers to conduct business away from fixed locations. Too many eyes, too many questions in places like this. One meeting, cash transaction, everyone goes home happy. The greed won out over the suspicion, as Marcus had hoped it would. Vikram nodded slowly, already counting the money in his mind. Okay. Where you want to meet? Must be private place, away from police. There's an abandoned warehouse district about 20 kilometers east of here, Marcus said, naming a location he had scouted earlier. Building 47 on Succumbit Road Extension. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. Come alone, bring the cub. My client will have money. Good. Vikram said, shaking Marcus's hand with palms that felt damp with nervous sweat. Tomorrow night, you bring money, I bring special animal. Everyone very happy with deal. Marcus walked out of the shop feeling sick to his stomach, but also determined. He had less than 24 hours to put together a plan that would save the cub without simply shifting the problem to another trafficking ring. The conservation group that had tipped him off would help, but this required more than just documentation and reporting. That evening, Marcus sat in his hotel room, making phone calls and sending encrypted messages. The first call went to Dr. Sarah Williams, a veterinarian who ran a tiger sanctuary about 200 kilometers away. She had dealt with rescue trafficking victims before and would know how to care for a traumatized cub. Marcus, thank God you called, Sarah said when she heard his voice. We've been tracking reports of missing cubs in this region for weeks. The mother you mentioned, we think she was part of a family group we've been monitoring. If this cub is who we think it is, she's incredibly important for genetic diversity. Can you be ready to take her tomorrow night? Marcus asked. This isn't going to be a normal handover. The situation is complicated. We'll be ready, Sarah said without hesitation. Whatever you need, we'll make it work. That cub deserves a chance at life. The second call went to James Murphy, a former military contractor who now works security for wildlife conservation operations. Marcus had worked with James before on dangerous assignments and trusted him to handle situations that required both discretion and the willingness to bend rules when necessary. You're planning something stupid, aren't you? James said after Marcus explained the situation. This sounds like the kind of plan that gets people arrested or worse. That cub is going to die if we don't do something, Marcus replied. I can't just document this and walk away. Not this time. There was a long pause before James sighed. What do you need me to do? Just be there tomorrow night. Make sure things don't get out of hand. Vikram thinks he's meeting a wealthy collector, but he's going to learn that some customers don't pay the way he expects. The third call was the most important and the most difficult. Marcus contacted the local wildlife protection unit, specifically an officer named Lieutenant Colonel Prezert, who had been working to shut down trafficking operations in the region. The conversation was delicate. Marcus needed official support without revealing his plan in detail. What you're describing sounds like entrapment, Lieutenant Colonel Prezert said carefully. We cannot be officially involved in any operation that breaks laws, even to save animals. I understand, Marcus replied. But if someone were to report suspicious activity at a specific location tomorrow night, and if officers happen to respond to that report, they might discover evidence of wildlife trafficking. Hypothetically, the lieutenant colonel said slowly, if such a report were made, we would have to investigate. And if we found evidence of illegal activity, we would be obligated to make arrests and confiscate any contraband animals. Hypothetically, Marcus agreed. The plan was risky and depended on timing, luck, and Vikram's greed overcoming his caution. But it was the only way Marcus could see to save the cub without simply enriching another criminal. He spent the rest of the evening going over every detail, trying to anticipate what could go wrong. At dawn, Marcus drove to the abandoned warehouse district to survey the meeting location. Building 47 was exactly what he needed, isolated enough for privacy, but with multiple exit routes and good visibility for anyone watching from a distance. The building itself was empty except for old machinery and debris, providing plenty of space for what he had planned. James arrived at midday, bringing equipment that officially didn't exist and asking questions that Marcus answered with as much honesty as possible. They spent hours going over the layout, establishing backup plans, and preparing for multiple scenarios. "You know this could backfire spectacularly," James said as they tested communication equipment. "If Vikram brings help, if he gets suspicious, if the authorities show up too early or too late." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "But I can't stop thinking about that cub's eyes. She's already given up hope, and she's only 3 months old. If we don't do something, she'll be dead within a month." Dr. Williams arrived as the sun was setting, bringing a mobile veterinary unit disguised as a delivery truck. She had everything needed to provide immediate medical care to a traumatized animal, plus the permits and paperwork required to transport a rescued tiger legally. "How bad is she?" Sarah asked after Marcus described the cub's condition. "Bad enough," Marcus replied. "Malnourished, probably dehydrated, definitely traumatized. She'll need intensive care just to survive the next few weeks." "We'll be ready," Sarah said, checking her supplies one more time. "Whatever condition she's in when we get her, we'll make sure she has everything she needs." As 9 o'clock approached, Marcus positioned himself inside the warehouse, while James took up a concealed position outside with communication equipment. Dr. Williams waited in her vehicle several blocks away, ready to move quickly when called. At exactly 9:15, Marcus heard a car engine echoing through the empty district. Through a broken window, he could see headlights approaching Building 47. His heart rate increased as he prepared for a confrontation that could save a life or destroy everything he had worked to build. The car stopped outside the building, and Marcus heard a door slam shut. Footsteps approached the entrance, accompanied by a small sound that made his chest tighten, the whimpering of a frightened animal. Vikram had brought the cub, just as promised. "Hello." Vikram's voice echoed through the empty building. "American buyer? I am here with special animal like we discussed." Marcus stepped out of the shadows, his hands visible but ready to move quickly if necessary. "I'm here," he called back. "Do you have what we talked about?" Vikram emerged from the darkness, carrying a small travel cage that looked barely adequate for transporting a house cat, much less a tiger cub. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the orange and black stripes through the wire mesh, and hear the soft sounds of an animal in distress. "She is perfect," Vikram said, setting the cage down and stepping back. "Very healthy, very beautiful. $50,000 like we agreed. You have money." Marcus walked closer, noting that Vikram appeared to be alone as promised. The cub was huddled in the back of the cage, pressed against the wire as if trying to disappear. She was smaller than Marcus had remembered, and looked even more fragile outside the dim light of the shop. "Let me see her properly first," Marcus said, kneeling down next to the cage. The cub's eyes met his, and he saw something that broke his heart, a complete lack of trust in humans, fear so deep it had become acceptance of whatever fate awaited her. "She is perfect specimen," Vikram said impatiently. "Very rare, very valuable. You want her or not? I have other buyers if you change mind." Marcus stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing into cold determination. "Actually," he said quietly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about how this transaction is going to work." Vikram's eyes narrowed with sudden suspicion. "What you mean?" "We agreed on price. We agreed on location. You have money or you waste my time." "Oh, I'm definitely paying," Marcus said, taking a step forward. "But not with money." The first punch caught Vikram completely off guard, connecting with his solar plexus and doubling him over, gasping for breath. Marcus had learned to fight in places where wildlife poachers carried guns and had no qualms about using them, and he put 20 years of suppressed anger into the blow. Vikram tried to straighten up and reach for something in his jacket, but Marcus was faster. A knee to the ribs sent the trafficker sprawling, and a quick search revealed a knife and a small pistol that Marcus tossed away into the darkness. "You want to know what rare specimens are really worth?" Marcus said, standing over Vikram, who was curled up holding his ribs. "They're worth more than money. They're worth doing whatever it takes to make sure pieces of garbage like you never touch them again." Vikram tried to crawl toward the exit, but Marcus grabbed him by the collar and hauled him back. "We're not finished yet. You're going to tell me about your suppliers, your customers, and every other animal you've trafficked through that shop." "You are crazy," Vikram gasped, blood running from his nose. "You cannot do this. I have friends. I have protection." "Your friends aren't here," Marcus said calmly. "And your protection doesn't extend to abandoned warehouses where no one can hear you scream. Start talking, or I start breaking bones systematically until you decide cooperation is better than surgery." The interrogation lasted 20 minutes. Marcus didn't enjoy violence, but he had seen too many dead animals and too many criminals walk away unpunished to feel any sympathy for Vikram. By the time Lieutenant Colonel Preserve and his team arrived in response to an anonymous tip about suspicious activity, Marcus had a detailed confession about trafficking operations across 3 countries. "This man was attacking me," Vikram yelled as the police handcuffed him. "I am victim here. He is crazy American who tried to rob me." Lieutenant Colonel Preserve looked at the scene, an injured trafficker, a cage containing an obviously illegal tiger cub, and Marcus standing nearby with bruised knuckles and a completely calm expression. "Interesting," the lieutenant colonel said dryly. "It looks like we responded to reports of wildlife trafficking and found a suspect who fell down several times while resisting arrest. Very clumsy of him. The paperwork took 2 hours to complete." By the time Dr. Williams was officially given custody of the rescued cub, it was past midnight. Marcus watched as Sarah gently transferred the small tiger to a proper transport carrier equipped with padding, water, and everything needed for the journey to the sanctuary. "She's going to make it," Sarah said quietly as they loaded the carrier into her vehicle. "It'll take time, but she's young enough to recover from this. Give her 6 months of proper care, and she'll remember what it feels like to be a tiger instead of a commodity." Marcus nodded, feeling exhausted, but satisfied. "What about release to the wild?" "Maybe eventually," Sarah replied. "Depends on how well she adapts and whether we can teach her to hunt. But even if she can never be released, she'll have a good life. Space to run, proper food, medical care, and no one who sees her as dollar signs." As Dr. Williams drove away with the rescued cub, Marcus reflected on the night's events. Vikram would face serious charges for wildlife trafficking, and his testimony would help authorities shut down larger operations. More importantly, one small tiger had been given a second chance at life. Lieutenant Colonel Preserve approached as Marcus was preparing to leave. "You know what you did tonight was technically assault," he said quietly. "Vikram could press charges if he wanted to." "Will he?" Marcus asked. "Somehow I doubt it," the lieutenant colonel replied with a slight smile. "Men who traffic in illegal animals rarely want to spend time in court explaining their business activities. And falls can be so embarrassing, especially when they happen during the commission of felony crimes." Marcus shook the officer's hand and walked to his rental car, already planning his next move. Dr. Williams had mentioned other missing cubs in the region, and Vikram's confession had provided leads to follow up on. The fight against wildlife trafficking was far from over, but tonight felt like a victory worth celebrating. As he drove back toward Bangkok, Marcus thought about the cub's eyes and how they had changed during the brief moments when Sarah was preparing her for transport. Instead of hopeless fear, he had seen something that might have been curiosity. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a beginning. Sometimes the only way to pay for something truly valuable was with broken bones, and the satisfaction of knowing that at least one criminal would think twice before hurting another innocent animal. Marcus had always been good at reading people, and tonight he had made sure one particular person got exactly what he deserved. 3 weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Marcus Chun received an encrypted message that changed everything. The sender was Lieutenant Colonel Preserve, and the contents were both encouraging and deeply troubling. Vikram Patel had been singing like a canary in his jail cell, providing information about a trafficking network that stretched across 5 countries and involved some very dangerous people. The good news was that authorities had already shut down 2 other illegal animal dealers based on Vikram's information. The bad news was that the people running the operation had noticed the disruption and were looking for whoever had caused their problems. Marcus read the message while sitting in Dr. Sarah Williams' office at the Tiger Sanctuary, where he had come to check on the rescued cub's progress. Through the window, he could see the young tiger exploring her temporary enclosure under Sarah's careful supervision. The transformation was remarkable. Proper nutrition and medical care had restored the shine to her orange coat, and her movements showed growing confidence instead of cowering fear. "She's doing better than I expected," Sarah said, following his gaze. "The trauma was severe, but she's young enough to adapt. Watch this." Sarah picked up a large ball with a rope attached and tossed it into the enclosure. The cub, who had been given the name Sorry by the sanctuary staff, immediately pounced on the toy with an enthusiasm that would have been impossible 3 weeks earlier. Her play was still cautious, but it was genuine play nonetheless. "Has she shown any interest in hunting behaviors?" Marcus asked, watching Sorry stalk the ball with movements that reminded him of wild tigers he had photographed. "Some," Sarah replied. "We've introduced dead prey items, and she shows natural instincts. The concern is whether she can transition to live prey eventually. Hand feeding creates dependencies that are hard to break." Marcus's phone buzzed with another message, this one from James Murphy. The former military contractor had been monitoring communications related to the trafficking network, and what he had discovered was concerning enough to warrant an immediate meeting. "I have to go," Marcus told Sarah, pocketing his phone. "Keep working with Sorry. If what I'm hearing is true, there might be more rescued animals coming your way soon." "What kind of operation are you planning now?" Sarah asked with concern. She had known Marcus long enough to recognize the expression that meant he was walking into danger again. "The kind that makes sure people like Vikram never get the chance to hurt another animal," Marcus replied. "But this time, it's bigger than one man with a cage. Much bigger." Marcus drove to a coffee shop in downtown Bangkok where James was waiting with a laptop, and expression that confirmed the seriousness of the situation. The former contractor had spent years tracking dangerous people, and his body language indicated they were dealing with something beyond normal wildlife trafficking. "Tell me you brought backup weapons," James said without preamble as Marcus sat down, "because what I've found is going to require more than fists and good intentions." James opened a laptop and showed Marcus a series of photographs and documents. The images were surveillance shots of a luxury compound about 150 kilometers north of Bangkok, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. The documents were shipping manifests and financial records that painted a picture of an operation worth millions of dollars. Vikram was small-time, James explained, a retail dealer buying from suppliers and selling to individual collectors. But his suppliers are part of something much larger, an organized syndicate that captures, breeds, and ships endangered species to buyers around the world. The financial records showed transactions in amounts that dwarfed what Marcus had expected. Individual tigers were being sold for 6 figures, rare birds for tens of thousands, and some animals were being shipped to private zoos and exotic hunting preserves where wealthy clients paid enormous sums to kill captive animals. "How many animals are we talking about?" Marcus asked, studying photographs that showed large truck movements and temporary holding facilities. "Best estimate based on shipping volumes and Vikram's information, maybe 200 animals at any given time," James said grimly. "Tigers, leopards, elephants, rhinos, pangolins, rare birds, primates. If it's endangered and valuable, they're trafficking it." Marcus felt the familiar anger building in his chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a sense of overwhelming responsibility. One rescued cub had been manageable, but 200 animals required resources and planning beyond what he could accomplish alone. What kind of security are we looking at? Marcus asked, assuming they were going to attempt some kind of rescue operation. Professional level, James replied, showing more surveillance photos. Armed guards, electronic perimeter monitoring, attack dogs. These people have military-grade equipment and the willingness to use it. This isn't a pet shop owner who folds after one punch. Marcus studied the compound layout, noting guard towers, vehicle checkpoints, and what appear to be separate buildings for different types of animals. The operation was sophisticated enough to suggest significant financial backing and government corruption. "We need help," Marcus said finally. "This is too big for two people, no matter how motivated we are." "Already working on it," James said. Lieutenant Colonel Presertt is assembling a joint task force with international wildlife protection agencies. The problem is jurisdiction, evidence requirements, and the fact that some of the people involved have political protection. Meaning we need irrefutable evidence of criminal activity before anyone will authorize a raid. And getting that evidence means getting inside the compound, which brings us back to the backup weapons question. Marcus considered the options while watching traffic stream past the coffee shop window. A frontal assault was impossible given the security measures, but there might be other approaches. The trafficking network needed customers, which meant they had to market their animals somehow. Vikram mentioned other buyers, Marcus said. People who had purchased from his suppliers before. What if we followed that connection? James pulled up another file, this one containing customer lists and communication records recovered from Vikram's shop. The names included wealthy individuals from Europe, North America, and Asia, along with several corporations that operated private hunting preserves and exotic animal attractions. "There," Marcus said, pointing to an entry near the bottom of the list. Richard Blackwood, Texas oil executive. Multiple purchases over 2 years, including a white tiger last month. What's his story? Rich, connected, and completely unethical, James said, accessing additional information. Operates a private hunting preserve where clients pay $50,000 to shoot captive tigers. He's planning a major acquisition next month. Something about a royal tiger experience for his most exclusive customers. Marcus felt pieces of a plan beginning to form. If Blackwood is planning a big purchase, the suppliers will want to impress him. They might be willing to show off their operation to secure a major sale. "You're thinking of going undercover as a buyer," James said. "That's incredibly dangerous. These people kill competitors and witnesses without hesitation." "Not as a buyer," Marcus corrected. "As Blackwood's representative. Someone sent to inspect the merchandise before finalizing a $1 million transaction." James was quiet for a long moment, working through the implications. "It could work," he said finally, "but we need perfect documentation, complete background stories, and backup plans for everything that could go wrong. Plus immediate extraction capability when things go sideways. When, not if. Definitely when. These people didn't build a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise by being trusting. They'll verify everything we tell them, and if they find any discrepancies, we'll disappear permanently." Marcus spent the next hour outlining his idea, while James pointed out potential problems and solutions. The plan was ambitious and risky, but it offered the possibility of documenting the entire operation and providing authorities with the evidence needed for a successful raid. The first step was establishing contact with the compound through channels that would seem legitimate. This required creating a false identity that could withstand scrutiny, complete with financial records, business references, and a history of exotic animal purchases. James handled the technical aspects, creating documentation that would pass initial investigation, while Marcus studied everything available about Richard Blackwood's business operations and personal interests. The oil executive was exactly the kind of person Marcus despised: wealthy, connected, and completely indifferent to the suffering his lifestyle caused. "We're going to need Sarah's help," Marcus said after reviewing the plan details. If this works, we'll need immediate veterinary support for potentially hundreds of traumatized animals. That's assuming we survive long enough to call for help, James pointed out. The compound is isolated, heavily guarded, and staffed by people who have killed to protect their operation. Once we're inside, there's no guarantee we'll be able to communicate with the outside world. Marcus understood the risks, but he also understood what would happen to the animals if the operation continued undisturbed. The trafficking network was expanding, and each month of delay meant more captured wildlife and more dead mothers leaving orphan young behind. That evening, Marcus returned to the sanctuary to discuss the plan with Sarah and check on Sari's continued progress. The young tiger was sleeping in a patch of afternoon sunlight, looking peaceful in a way that reminded Marcus why the risks were worthwhile. She started hunting, Sarah said quietly, joining Marcus at the observation window. We introduced live fish to her water feature yesterday, and she caught 3 of them within an hour. The instincts are still there. What about eventual release? Marcus asked. Possible, but it would require at least another year of rehabilitation and wilderness training. The trauma was severe, and she'll always be more comfortable with humans than a wild tiger should be. Marcus watched Sari stretch and showing teeth that would eventually be powerful enough to bring down adult water buffalo. In the wild, she would have learned hunting from her mother and gradually developed the skills needed to survive independently. The traffickers had stolen that natural education along with her freedom. I need you to prepare for a mass rescue operation, Marcus said, explaining the plan he and James had developed. Potentially 200 animals in various stages of trauma and malnutrition. Can the sanctuary handle that kind of influx? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, calculating space, staff, and resources. We could handle maybe 50 animals with our current facilities, she said finally. For 200, we need help from other sanctuaries, emergency funding, and a small army of veterinarians. But yes, it's possible if everyone cooperates. Start making preparations, Marcus said. Contact other sanctuaries, line up emergency supplies, and coordinate with Lieutenant Colonel Presert's task force. If this plan works, we're going to need immediate response capability. And if the plan doesn't work? Sarah asked. Marcus looked at Sari one more time, remembering the fear in her eyes when he first saw her in Vikram's cage. Then, at least we'll have tried to do something about a problem that everyone else is willing to ignore. The next morning, Marcus began the process of becoming Thomas Harrison, exclusive agent for Richard Blackwood's exotic animal acquisition program. James had created documentation showing million-dollar transactions for rare animals, references from fictional but convincing business associates, and a bank account with enough money to pass initial financial verification. The contact was made through encrypted channels that Vikram had provided, using codes and procedures that would indicate legitimate business interest rather than law enforcement investigation. The message was simple. A major American buyer was interested in acquiring multiple rare specimens for a private preserve and was willing to pay premium prices for exceptional quality and discretion. The response came within 12 hours, along with instructions for an initial meeting at a neutral location. Marcus would be evaluated as a potential customer and, if approved, invited to tour the main facility where final negotiations would take place. James spent the day teaching Marcus advanced surveillance techniques and emergency protocols. They practiced covert photography, secure communication methods, and what James euphemistically called extraction under fire, how to escape from armed pursuit in hostile territory. Remember, James said as they prepared for the initial contact meeting, these people are professional criminals with a lot to lose. They'll be looking for any sign that you're not what you claim to be. Stay in character, stick to the story, and don't try to be a hero if things go wrong. Marcus nodded, checking the hidden camera equipment and communication devices James had provided. The technology was impressive. Tiny cameras that looked like shirt buttons, microphones disguised as pen clips, and a GPS tracker that would allow authorities to locate him even inside the compound. "What's the extraction plan if I'm discovered?" Marcus asked. "Run fast and call for backup," James said with dark humor. "Lieutenant Colonel Preserve will have a tactical team standing by, but it'll take them at least an hour to reach the compound. You'll need to survive that long on your own." As evening approached, Marcus prepared mentally for what might be his most dangerous undercover operation. The stakes were higher than anything he had attempted before, but so was the potential reward. 200 animals were counting on him to succeed, even though they had no idea hope was coming. The meeting location was a high-end hotel restaurant in Bangkok, the kind of place where wealthy criminals could conduct business while appearing to be legitimate businessmen. Marcus arrived early, taking a table with good sight lines and easy access to multiple exits. At exactly 8 o'clock, a woman approached his table. She was well-dressed, professional, and carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Her eyes were intelligent and calculating, missing nothing as she evaluated Marcus. "Mr. Harrison," she said in accented English, "I am Lu Wei, representing parties interested in your business proposal. Shall we discuss your requirements?" Marcus studied Lu Wei as she settled into the chair across from him, noting the way her eyes constantly scanned the restaurant and how she positioned herself with clear lines of sight to both exits. She was definitely professional security, not just a business representative. Her presence confirmed that the trafficking organization took potential threats seriously. "Mr. Blackwood sends his regards," Marcus said, sliding a business card across the table. "He's particularly interested in acquiring breeding pairs of endangered cats for his new facility. Money is no object when it comes to exceptional specimens." Lu Wei examined the card carefully before placing it in her purse. "Mr. Blackwood has excellent taste," she replied. "We have provided animals for several of his previous projects. However, this meeting is to evaluate new representation. We prefer dealing with consistent contacts." Richard's previous agent retired rather suddenly, Marcus said, using a cover story James had developed. "Health issues related to a hunting accident. I've been handling his acquisitions for the past 6 months, including a white rhino from your Botswana operation." The mention of the rhino was a calculated risk based on intelligence from Vikram's confession, but it had the desired effect. Lu Wei's expression showed recognition and approval that Marcus was familiar with the organization's global operations. "That was a successful transaction," she agreed. "Very professional, very discreet." Mr. Blackwood was satisfied with the quality. "Extremely satisfied," Marcus replied, "which is why he's interested in expanding his relationship with your organization. The new facility can accommodate much larger orders, dozens of animals rather than individual specimens." Lu Wei's eyes sharpened with interest. Large orders meant large profits, exactly what Marcus had hoped she would focus on. "What specific requirements does Mr. Blackwood have for this expansion?" Marcus pulled out a tablet displaying a fictional facility layout and a list of desired animals that made his stomach turn. The list included breeding pairs of tigers, leopards, and cheetahs, along with elephants, rhinos, and various primates. Each animal represented millions of dollars in illegal profit. "The time frame is flexible," Marcus continued, "but Mr. Blackwood prefers to inspect major acquisitions personally before finalizing purchases. He's planning a visit to Southeast Asia next month and would like to tour your facilities." "That's unusual," Lu Wei said carefully. "Our operations require significant security measures. We don't normally allow customer visits to production facilities." "Mr. Blackwood understands security concerns," Marcus assured her. "He's willing to follow whatever protocols you require. But for a transaction worth $10 million, he insists on personal quality control." The figure was enormous enough to get Lu Wei's full attention. Marcus could see her calculating profit margins and commission percentages while weighing security risks. Greed was winning, just as he had hoped. "I will need to discuss this with my superiors," she said finally. "Mr. Blackwood's reputation is excellent, but facility tours are unprecedented. Of course, Marcus said. Take whatever time you need. But please understand that Mr. Blackwood has other potential suppliers. If your organization isn't comfortable accommodating his requirements, there are alternatives. The mention of competition sealed the deal. Lu Wei's expression showed that losing a $10 million customer to rivals was unacceptable. I'm sure we can arrange something appropriate, she said quickly. Perhaps a modified tour focusing on specific animals rather than general operations. They spent another hour discussing details, with Marcus providing background information that James had crafted and Lu Wei asking questions that tested his knowledge of the illegal animal trade. By the end of the meeting, Marcus felt confident that he had passed initial scrutiny. Expect contact within 48 hours, Lu Wei said as they prepared to leave. My superiors will want additional verification, but I believe we can accommodate Mr. Blackwood's requirements. Marcus returned to his hotel, feeling cautiously optimistic about the first phase of the operation. James was waiting with monitoring equipment that had recorded the entire conversation, providing valuable intelligence about the organization's security procedures and decision-making process. She bought it, Marcus reported. But they're going to verify everything before committing to a facility tour. How solid is the documentation you created? Solid enough to pass standard verification, James replied. The bank account has real money. The business references will answer phones with convincing stories, and the transaction history is buried deep enough to survive casual investigation. The question is whether they'll stop at casual investigation. Over the next 2 days, Marcus maintained his Thomas Harrison identity while James monitored communications to track the verification process. The trafficking organization was thorough, checking financial records, business references, and even attempting to contact Richard Blackwood directly. Fortunately, James had anticipated this and prepared accordingly. A former colleague with voice modification equipment posed as Blackwood, providing confirmation that Thomas Harrison was his authorized representative for Southeast Asian acquisitions. The performance was convincing enough to satisfy the organization's security requirements. The call came on the third morning. Lu Wei's voice was professional but warmer than during their initial meeting, indicating that verification had been successful. Mr. Harrison, we are pleased to invite you to tour our primary facility. Transport will be provided from Bangkok tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please bring only essential items. All equipment and supplies will be provided. Marcus agreed to the terms while noting the restrictions on personal belongings. The organization didn't want visitors bringing recording equipment or communication devices that might compromise their security. Fortunately, James had anticipated this and provided surveillance gear that would pass casual inspection. Remember, James said as they made final preparations, your primary objective is documenting the facility and animal conditions. Getting everyone out alive is more important than gathering evidence, so don't take unnecessary risks. Lieutenant Colonel Preserve briefed Marcus on the tactical team's position and response timeline. We'll have units stationed at 3 locations around the compound, he explained. If you activate the emergency signal, response time will be approximately 45 minutes. That's assuming the traffickers don't have early warning systems or corruption in local police units. What about the animals? Marcus asked. If shooting starts, they'll be trapped in the crossfire. Dr. Williams has assembled a veterinary team with tranquilizer equipment, the lieutenant colonel replied. First priority will be securing the facility, then immediate medical attention for any animals that need it. Marcus spent the evening reviewing facility layouts based on satellite imagery and intelligence from previous investigations. The compound was larger than originally estimated, with multiple buildings that appeared to house different types of animals. Getting comprehensive documentation would require several hours inside the facility. Transport arrived promptly at 9 a.m., a luxury SUV with tinted windows and 2 security guards who searched Marcus thoroughly before allowing him inside the vehicle. They confiscated his phone and watch, providing a different phone that could only make calls to pre-approved numbers. The drive took 3 hours through increasingly rural terrain, giving Marcus time to observe security measures and memorize route details. The guards were professional and well-armed, confirming that the organization took protection seriously. They spoke little English, but Marcus caught enough conversation to understand they were discussing his background verification. The compound appeared suddenly, as they crested a hill, revealing an operation far larger than satellite images had suggested. The main facility covered several acres, with numerous buildings, vehicle parking areas, and what appeared to be outdoor enclosures for larger animals. Security was visible, but not overwhelming. Guards at entry points, cameras on perimeter fences, but nothing that would attract unwanted attention from aerial surveillance. Lu Wei met them at the main gate, wearing business attire that looked out of place in a rural setting. "Welcome, Mr. Harrison," she said as guards checked identification and vehicle contents. "I hope the journey wasn't too uncomfortable." "Not at all," Marcus replied, noting electronic scanning equipment and armed guards who carried military-grade weapons. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you've accomplished here." The initial building was clearly designed to impress potential customers. Clean, well-lit, with comfortable offices and reception areas that looked more like a legitimate business than a criminal operation. Lu Wei provided an overview of the organization's capabilities while leading Marcus toward the animal facilities. "We maintain approximately 180 animals at this location," she explained. "Breeding programs for rare cats, elephants, and primates, plus acquisition and conditioning services for special orders. All animals receive excellent veterinary care and proper nutrition." Marcus nodded while mentally noting details for later reporting. The professional presentation was impressive, but he needed to see actual animal conditions rather than sanitized touring areas. The first enclosure they visited housed adult tigers, 6 animals in spaces that were adequate, but clearly designed for containment rather than animal welfare. The tigers showed signs of stress and boredom, pacing repetitively and showing little interest in their surroundings. "These are our breeding stock," Lu Wei said proudly. "Perfect specimens with excellent bloodlines. The cubs are kept separately until they're ready for transport or training." "Training?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "Some customers prefer animals that are acclimated to human contact," Lu Wei explained. "We can provide basic conditioning services for an additional fee. Very popular with hunting preserve operators." Marcus felt sick, but maintained his professional demeanor while documenting everything with hidden cameras. The conditioning was clearly designed to make animals easier to kill by reducing their natural fear of humans. They visited several more enclosures housing leopards, cheetahs, and various primate species. The conditions were better than Marcus had expected, but still represented significant suffering for animals that should have been living in natural habitats. Many showed obvious signs of psychological distress from captivity. "And here are the cubs," Lu Wei said, leading Marcus to a building that looked more like a nursery than an animal facility. Marcus's heart nearly stopped when he saw the interior. Dozens of cages contained young animals of various species: tiger cubs, leopard cubs, baby elephants, young primates, and other animals that couldn't have been more than a few months old. The similarities to Sari's original condition were unmistakable. "Where do they come from?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Various sources," Lu Wei replied evasively. "Some are from our breeding programs, others are acquired through our international network. All are properly documented for export." Marcus studied the cubs while fighting to maintain his composure. Several showed signs of malnutrition and trauma similar to what Sari had experienced. Others appeared healthier, but still displayed the psychological damage that came from premature separation from their mothers. The documentation, Marcus said carefully, "How do you handle international shipping regulations?" "We have excellent relationships with customs officials in multiple countries," Lu Wei said with a smile that made Marcus want to hit her. "Paperwork is rarely a problem for valued customers." The corruption extended beyond the trafficking operation itself, involving government officials who facilitated illegal animal shipments in exchange for bribes. The scope of the criminal enterprise was larger than Marcus had imagined. They spent another 2 hours touring the facility with Marcus documenting everything while maintaining his cover as an interested buyer. The evidence he was gathering would be sufficient to shut down the operation and prosecute everyone involved, assuming he could survive long enough to deliver it to authorities. "Now for the special collection," Lu Wei said, leading Marcus to a separate building that was more heavily guarded than the others. "These are animals acquired for very specific customers with unique requirements." The special collection was horrifying. Cages contained albino animals, rare genetic variants, and species so endangered that each individual represented a significant portion of the remaining wild population. The value of the animals in this building was incalculable, both in monetary terms and conservation importance. "We have a white tiger cub that might interest Mr. Blackwood," Lu Wei said, stopping in front of a cage that made Marcus's blood boil. 3 months old, perfect health, from a verified bloodline. Very rare, very valuable. The white tiger cub was beautiful and heartbreaking, with blue eyes that held the same hopeless fear Marcus had seen in Sari. The animal was clearly traumatized and malnourished despite Lu Wei's claims about health and care. "Excellent," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "Mr. Blackwood will be very interested." "What's the asking price?" "For Mr. Blackwood, considering his previous business with us, $200,000, Lu Wei said. "A very reasonable price for such a rare specimen." Marcus agreed to preliminary terms while mentally noting the location and condition of every animal in the building. The evidence he was gathering would be enough to convict the entire organization, but first he had to escape the compound alive. The tour concluded with a return to the administrative offices, where Lu Wei presented contracts and shipping arrangements for Marcus's review. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface, but the underlying criminal enterprise was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. "Mr. Blackwood will be very pleased," Marcus said, accepting copies of the paperwork. "When can we finalize the transaction?" "Payment and shipping could be arranged within 1 week," Lu Wei replied. "We prefer electronic transfer to our Hong Kong accounts, with animals shipped through our Bangkok facility." Marcus was signing preliminary agreements when alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Lu Wei's expression changed instantly from friendly business representative to dangerous criminal as guards rushed into the office with weapons drawn. "There's been a security breach," one guard reported in rapid Thai. "Perimeter sensors detected unauthorized movement in Sector 3. Lu Wei barked orders while Marcus tried to appear confused rather than terrified. His emergency signal device was hidden in his belt buckle, but activating it now would confirm that he was the source of the security problem. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison," Lu Wei said with false politeness. "We need to implement temporary security protocols. Please remain here while we investigate." Marcus was effectively under arrest, trapped in the administrative building while armed guards checked the perimeter for threats. If the security breach was related to Lieutenant Colonel Presert's tactical team, the situation was about to become very dangerous very quickly. Through the office windows, Marcus could see guards taking positions around the compound and additional security arriving from off-site locations. The organization had clearly prepared for law enforcement raids and had resources beyond what authorities had anticipated. "Sir," one guard said to Lu Wei in English, "we found evidence of electronic surveillance near the main animal facility. Professional-grade equipment." Lu Wei's eyes turned to Marcus with suspicion that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Harrison, did you bring any recording equipment to our facility?" "Of course not," Marcus replied as convincingly as possible. "Your people searched me thoroughly before transport. I followed all your protocols exactly." "Yes," Lu Wei said slowly, "but perhaps your arrival coincided with other interested parties. We've had problems with wildlife activists attempting to gather evidence for international prosecutions." The gunfire started before Marcus could respond. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple locations around the compound as Lieutenant Colonel Presert's tactical team engaged the trafficker's security forces. The battle Marcus had hoped to avoid was happening with him trapped in the middle of it. Get him to the safe room, Lu Wei shouted over the gunfire. He's either valuable as a hostage or he's working with the raiders. Either way, we need him secured. Guards grabbed Marcus roughly, dragging him toward a reinforced door that led to what appeared to be an underground bunker. If they lock him in there, he would be trapped while the firefight determined the fate of 180 animals and his own survival. Marcus waited until they were halfway down the stairs before activating the hidden taser James had provided. The first guard collapsed immediately, but the second was faster than Marcus had anticipated. A gunshot echoed in the concrete stairwell as Marcus dove for cover behind a metal door. The bullet missed by inches, but Marcus was now trapped between armed traffickers above and limited escape routes below. His only advantage was that the tactical team knew his approximate location and would be trying to reach him. "Mr. Harrison," Lu Wei's voice called down the stairwell, "I strongly suggest you surrender peacefully. My associates become very unfriendly when shooting starts." Marcus ignored her while searching the bunker for weapons, communication equipment, or anything that might improve his situation. The facility was designed as a command center, with monitors showing security camera feeds from around the compound. On the screens, Marcus could see the tactical team advancing systematically through the facility while traffickers fell back toward predetermined defensive positions. The battle was intense, but appeared to be going in favor of the authorities. More importantly, he could see Dr. Williams and her veterinary team moving into secured areas to begin animal recovery operations. Several large transport trucks had positioned near animal enclosures, ready to evacuate rescued wildlife to proper care facilities. The stairwell door burst open as Lu Wei and two guards descended into the bunker, all carrying weapons and looking determined to end the threat Marcus represented. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they located his position and eliminated him permanently. Marcus activated his emergency beacon while simultaneously triggering the facility's fire suppression system, filling the bunker with chemical foam that reduced visibility to zero. In the confusion that followed, he heard gunshots, shouting, and the sound of tactical team explosives breaching the main building. When the foam finally cleared 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself face-to-face with Lieutenant Colonel Prezert and a team of heavily armed officers. Lu Wei and her associates were unconscious on the floor, casualties of stun grenades and professional police tactics. "Are you injured?" Lieutenant Colonel Prezert asked while medics checked Marcus for wounds. "No," Marcus replied, though he was shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. "But there are 180 animals here that need immediate medical attention. Some of them won't survive much longer without proper care." The compound had been secured with minimal casualties among the law enforcement team, though several traffickers had been killed during the initial engagement. More importantly, the entire animal collection was now in the custody of Dr. Williams and her expanded veterinary team. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus watched as teams of specialists documented evidence, processed arrests, and began the massive task of evaluating and treating nearly 200 traumatized animals. The scope of the operation was overwhelming, but the coordination between law enforcement and wildlife protection agencies was impressive. "The white tiger cub you saw," Dr. Williams said as she supervised animal transport operations, "she's in critical condition. Severe malnutrition and signs of abuse beyond anything we expected. But she's fighting, and we think she can make it with intensive care." Marcus nodded, thinking about Sari and how far she had come with proper treatment. "What about the others?" "Mixed conditions," Sarah replied grimly. "About 30% will require immediate life-saving intervention. Another 40% need significant rehabilitation. The remaining animals are in better shape, but still show trauma symptoms." "Can you handle all of them?" Marcus asked. "We've contacted every reputable sanctuary in Southeast Asia, plus several international organizations," Sarah said. "It'll take months to properly place everyone, but yes, we can handle it. No animal from this facility will ever be sold or suffer trafficking again." As evening approached, Marcus helped load the last transport truck with rescued animals. The white tiger cub was in a specialized carrier with medical monitoring equipment, fighting for life just as Sari had 3 weeks earlier. "You did something extraordinary today," Lieutenant Colonel Preserve said as they watched the convoy of rescue vehicles disappear into the darkness. "This operation will save hundreds of animals and shut down trafficking networks in 5 countries. What about the people involved?" Marcus asked. "The buyers, the corrupt officials, the whole international network." "Liu Wei is already providing information in exchange for reduced sentences," the lieutenant colonel replied. "We expect arrests across 3 continents within the next month. This organization is finished." Marcus drove back to Bangkok feeling exhausted, but satisfied. The mission had been successful beyond his original hopes, but the personal cost had been higher than expected. He had seen enough suffering to last a lifetime, and enough evil to understand why some problems required extreme solutions. 3 months later, Marcus visited Dr. Williams' sanctuary to check on the progress of animals rescued from the compound. Sari had grown significantly and was showing strong hunting instincts in her expanded enclosure. The white tiger cub, now named Hope, was thriving under intensive care and beginning to show playful behaviors. "Hope will never be releasable," Sarah explained as they watched the young tiger explore her rehabilitation enclosure. "The trauma was too severe, and white tigers have genetic issues that make wild survival difficult. But she'll have a good life here, and her presence helps educate people about the costs of wildlife trafficking." Marcus nodded, watching Hope pounce on a toy with enthusiasm that reminded him of Sari's early recovery. Both cubs had survived experiences that killed many animals, and both now had futures that included dignity, proper care, and freedom from exploitation. "Any regrets about how we handled things?" Sarah asked. Marcus considered the question while watching Hope play. The operation had involved violence, deception, and risks that could have resulted in multiple deaths. But it had also saved nearly 200 animals from continued suffering and shut down a criminal enterprise worth millions of dollars. "No regrets," he said finally. "Sometimes the only way to pay for something truly valuable is with whatever currency the seller understands." Vikram understood broken bones. The trafficking organization understood superior firepower and the collapse of their security. Everyone got exactly what they deserved. The rescued animals were living proof that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost or moral complexity involved. Marcus had learned that reading people was useful, but acting on what you discovered was what actually changed the world. As he walked back to his car, Marcus received a text message from James about reports of elephant trafficking in Cambodia. The fight against wildlife criminals would never end, but at least 180 animals would never again be merchandise in that terrible trade. Sometimes the most important transactions weren't about money at all. They were about ensuring that beautiful, innocent creatures got the chance to live with dignity instead of dying as commodities. And sometimes the only way to make that happen was by paying with broken bones and walking away with what should never have been for sale in the first place.